Right, let's get a sketchbook image to start the show. It's a funny old day weather-wise, as I'll probably talk about during the show. Not sure this is... What is this? This is just a pile of wood. Neil, it's a pile of wood. It doesn't make a great photo. It's a sketchbook image, though. It's where I'm walking. It looks like one of those piles that you often find when you're in Africa. I'm going to call this my out of Africa picture, because I truly am out of Africa. 320 f4, 160 ISO. Here we go.
So, yeah, it was as Wild West as anything could be. There wasn't a whole lot of information about how to do a podcast, so I was sort of putting things together sort of piecemeal, from how to record audio, how to edit audio, and I started using GarageBand and creating a website, understanding what a blog was. So all these things I had to sort of learn at sort of the same time. But I felt like, wow, this is a great format for photographers to talk about photography rather than gear.
The foreword.
The wonderful velvety voice of Ibarionex Perello. A voice which I'm sure many of you will be aware of through his 19-year running podcast about photography called The Candid Frame. This week, I invite you to step behind the scenes a little. Let me invite you into my world of podcasting. But podcasting about this thing that we love, photography, of course. Now, when I first started listening to podcasts, Ibarionex's voice was, I think, the first that greeted me in the podcast sphere, in terms of photography anyway. And I absolutely loved him for this late-night, midnight caller, calming, trustworthy, exceptionally knowledgeable voice that he had, and tone, describing an art form that, that being photography, by the way of intimate conversations with other photographers. Some of those photographers I knew by name, and some were totally new to me. Voices and thoughts that I'm sure have shaped the way that I feel about this picture-making thing that I do today. And it was all held together, as I say, by this wonderful voice. The voice who is Ibarionex. So yes, I invite you to a conversation about photography, but equally about this thing, this podcasting thing, this way of communicating to a world that wasn't possible before that magical, weird thing that I still don't understand called the RSS feed. A way to digitally broadcast from your own home in Lower Biscuitsville to Timbuktu. Put your hands up if you know where Timbuktu is. Anybody? You. Yeah, you know. Rest of the room, no idea. Once upon a time, if you wanted to share your thoughts about everything from photography to basket weaving, you had to impress upon a boss in an ivory tower at one of the big important world networks, high up in a building where all the fittings were probably solid gold, that you were worth what was called airtime. But then one day that all changed. Sort of. I mean, there's a few stories in between, but go with me. There was a time when listening to stuff, and we'll deal with YouTube later on, meant tuning in, same time, same place, same station. But podcasting broke the clock. You carry your stories in your pocket, voices in your ears while you walk the dog and clean the house and stare out the window of the Pinstriped Express. It's intimate, and for the good and bad, it's unfiltered. You choose the place, you choose the pace, as they say. You pause, you rewind, you skip the bits that don't speak to you, and you replay the bits that do. And the people behind the mic, well, they're not broadcasting at you. They're talking with you, like a friend with something to say, and no rush to say it. Podcasting has changed the why and the how, I think, of listening. Now, I know he won't necessarily like this. So Ibarionex, please take it in the with the respect that's meant by me saying it. But you are to me, he is to me, the grand statesman of photography podcasting. And it is an honour, if not slightly odd in a Meet Your Heroes way, to have as my guest today somebody who's helped build the platform of photography podcasting. And I really mean that. He's built it to the extent that I'm here today doing this thing.
Today on the Photowalk.
The best part of making a photograph is not releasing the shutter or even making the print. It's that moment where I go, ooh, if you let go of that poison of comparison, there's a lot of freedom to be had there. In terms of the kind of podcast that I do, AI is not going to replace anything that I'm doing, just because by its very nature, it's about, the human connection between two people. I've gotten to meet countless people who are producing exceptional work that do not have the fame, but who are creating exceptional work. People think about Joe Rogan and making multi-millions of dollars, like there are easier ways of making money than doing podcasting. I needed to be creative in some way. I needed to do it. I could not keep going, not making photographs.
That's Ibarionex Perello, my guest on the Photowalk today. Alongside him, I'll be sharing some of your letters, your stories and thoughts that you sent in about life and your adventures with the camera, as we walk together, of course. It's a show shaped by you as much as my wonderful guests, which is what makes this time together every single week feel so special and personal. I'll peek into that mailbag in a moment just to see what's coming up. But before that, I want to personally thank those who are Patreon members of our community, our extra milers, because your belief in this show, your desire to keep us walking week after week, is the why and the total how of this podcast. Every week there's an extra show available through Patreon, which features a further part of my conversation with Ibarionex today, and a new feature called Reflections, my own take on making pictures and a life behind the lens. Thank you also to our sponsor, arthelper.ai, who help you to sell your photos online by making the posts and the mock-ups and those marketing emails you can never think to write. If you've ever thought, look, I'd like to sell my work, but I don't really have a clue where to start, that's where arthelper.ai comes in. They do that tricky stuff for you. You get 30 days free with the code Photowalk when you go to arthelper.ai. Right, on the show today, Matthies Wesche is about to dangle precariously from his seat, photographing people who believe it's more fun to jump out of aeroplanes than enjoy the complimentary wine and molten-hot Thermo Lasagne Surprise. We have some news about a rustic workshop. Go brush your tents off, take the spiders out the folds. And Chris Articulate, from A Land Down Under, cue the song I expect he hates. Chris has some thoughts about one YouTube channel, Sony cameras, and the podcast. Do I need to find me tin helmet? So shall we walk? Checklist out, coffee check. Garibaldi's, got those, check. I must remember to buy some for the 500 recording on Wednesday. Walking boots, check. The spare film, extra SD card, yep, check. And turn that ruddy thing off on your podcast app that fills the spaces in or plays the episode at 1.5 speed, because having those switched on while the grand statesman of mellifluous voice and podcasting is here as a guest would be sacrilege in terms of sound. It'd be like slurping soup in a cathedral. Check, I think. Let's walk. The letters, the emails, the comments you send in are what give this community its heartbeat. Your reflections on walking and creativity and photography, they offer a welcome pause from the noise of this everyday life right now, he says, with a furrowed brow slightly. Here's a letter flying in to start with. There's significance, by the way, to that comment flying in. It's from Matthies Wesche. Neil, it's been a while, I know. I do apologise. You don't need to, Matthies. I know you're very busy. I'm currently on my way to Great Britain once again, actually writing this letter on the ferry to Harwich. And this time, I'll try and remember to look out for the infamous dead fly biscuits, so I finally know what you're talking about. Oh, you'll find them. They're our greatest export, Matthies. Next to proper strawberry jam and queue etiquette manuals. After you, no, after you. After you, no, after you. I insist after you, no, after you. We'll be travelling around Wales, says Matthies, this time with a friend and visiting a few places we've been recommended. We started visiting Britain in 2022 with a trip around Scotland. Oh, you know how to start. Where we met said friend and the country took our hearts by storm. I believe that's how you say it. We do. Actually, Matthies, you're practically British, speaking like that. Please collect Harris tweed and a bow tie on your way in. Anyway, that's not actually what I wanted to tell you about, though. I've done something I've been dreaming about for quite a while. Is it legal, Matthies? Or do I need to call the lawyers to look at your letter? It all begins with a friend of my wife who one day decided it was a great idea to voluntarily exit a fully functional aeroplane mid-flight as long as she was wearing a parachute. And as soon as she had that figured out, she decided it was even more reasonable to do so with 3 other friends and gracefully fall toward the earth in formation. They started to do this competitively and figured they could do with some team photos. Oh, I see where this is going, you know. So we visited them and I took their pictures. I have to say, I was absolutely fascinated with all the processes. I probably asked too many questions about the canopy, how it's constructed, how it needs to be packed and all that, but I rested far more assured that it's much safer to jump back to Earth than to take the plane back. I'm not so sure I believe that. Matthies, I still don't get how people think it's fun to strap a big tablecloth to your back, tied together by bits of string or whatever, and fling themselves through a cloud or 3 from 10,000 feet up. I might need some convincing. Fast forward, this summer, says Matthies, they needed new photographs, and I had an idea. I wanted to shoot them inside the plane this time, capture their faces and their emotions in the minutes leading up to their jump. So the plan was I'd be in the plane, being strapped to my own tandem master just in case near the door and make pictures, and that's what I did. What, you were going to jump as well? Matthies, have I taught you nothing? Once all that lot have jumped, that just means you've got more of the in-flight sandwiches and fun-sized gin bottles all to yourself. First flight of the day, my wife took the opportunity to finally do the tandem jump she'd wanted to do all her life. So there was my wife and I with our tandem masters, the team of formation jumpers, or whatever they're called in English. I think that's what they're called in English. And a handful of others crammed into a very small school bus-sized plane. I can't say I had much wiggle room with my beloved XT3 and the 16-80. Not too fast of a lens, but I wanted the versatility. And thankfully, everybody on board helped me get the shots by joining in with excited smiles and plenty of anticipation. We approached jumping height, and I saw their faces, a mix of deep focus going through the motions for the fall and joy for what's to come. Is that what you saw in their faces? Open the door, they huddle up, and in the blink of an eye, they're out. The plane bumped up a bit due to the weight that's suddenly gone. My wife and her tandem master made their way to the door. They positioned themselves, and 3, 2, 1, they were gone as well. That's the picture of the hand with the altimeter. Her tandem master had just let go of the plane. I think that's a cracking photo, by the way. I'll come back to that. Next step for them, approach Mother Earth at around 200 kilometers an hour. And then the fun started. I thought the pilot might go easy on the descent since there were people left in the plane, but apparently time is money and he needs to collect the next load. Oh, I get it now. You were strapped to another tandem master just in case during your picture making you got a bit too close to the door and then zoop, you were out as well. Right, that makes sense. I get it. This pilot, said Matthies, clearly didn't go easy one bit, so that he could crack on with getting the next lot up into the air. Had he not had to go around due to too much speed on the first approach, my feet probably would have touched the ground before my wife's did. My word, he really did race back, didn't he? What a day, though. I attached some of the shots I took inside the plane for you to enjoy, and as a bonus, a look into the cockpit during one of the sharper turns. Well, that's my story. Thank you as ever for the great podcast. It's a set part of my commute to work now to listen to, and it takes me wandering when work won't let me. All the best from the Northern Sea. Matthies. Well, I love these pictures. They'll be on the show page. And I particularly love the one of the hand exiting the plane. In a very odd way, or maybe not so odd, I found myself feeling very nervous for everybody in those photographs that you made. So hand across one of those mini gins from the trolley, would you? I think I need a steadier. It's always a lot of fun, and it's what this show is about, to hear your fantastic adventures. That is what I believe makes this show so very different in our nichette of the podcast sphere. Your letters, your thoughts, your brushes with skydiving accidentally. Matthies, I will be keeping my eye on you, definitely. Keep sending them in to stories@photowalk.show if you're sending in pictures 2,500 pixels wide, please. Before I introduce my guest to you, the wonderful Ibarionex Perello, I would like to, for the final time this month, because I can't believe next week is the start of a new month, really, could we stop this racing through month stuff? Honestly. I'm going to let you have the assignment early on in the show, the one-word assignment. Now, news. There will be no assignment next month due to my ad hoc travels, it being summer holes and moving around and so on, which gives me a chance to really upload every single picture, every picture, and properly catch up with all the assignment pictures, because you've been simply brilliant this year with your entries. I intend to announce this month's winner in September, right at the start. So you have additional time to work on the one-word picture, the one-word assignment, which is set by former guest Gary Ramage. Ramo, what is that word?
I think I'll go with tranquility.
Oh, perfect. Tranquility. And I like that particularly for this show. We talk a lot about the quiet of photographs.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to think of one of your pictures that would show total tranquility. I'm going to choose one from the war zone, actually, which we talked about in your interview, which is the young lad, the 20-year-old lad, 21-year-old lad, cuddled into his bomb disposal worker dog, keeping warm together in the night.
It's a beautiful picture, and yeah, I don't normally say that about my pictures. I don't really talk about my pictures, but it is. I've got it as it's a massive sort of 3 meter by 2 meter picture on my wall. And part of the reason it's in the dining room is when we have dinner with guests, it's the first thing they see. It's the talking point.
Do you go out with your camera to try and find tranquility at all? Are you somebody who looks for the quiet?
Yeah, probably first thing in the morning. Like, we're coming into winter now, so normally what I'll do, I'll walk down the driveway and I'll just take photos of frost and peace and quiet. Before I go off to my job, and it just sets me on my path for the day. Send your pictures to stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. Best of luck. 2,500 pixels wide if possible. Best of luck, Neil. Why? Well, because we do have a flask, the famous, not so famous flask, to give to the picture that I Englishly feel awkward about giving a prize to, because they're all so good. I bet you say that to all the photographers, Neil. No, I mean it. I do. I'm really appreciative for all the efforts that are made in this feature. No watermarks, no borders, but do include links to your socials or your website so we can share more of your work. Submissions go on the assignments page and may feature on the Instagram as well, always with a tag back to you, of course. Right, 3 parts across today's show with my guest, and a further part over on the Patreon channel, or the Extra Mile as it's correctly known. Ibarionex Perello is my guest, a photographer, a writer, an educator, and the voice behind one of the longest running and most respected photography podcasts out there, The Candid Frame. For almost 2 decades, that's going to be some party, Ibarionex, it must be. For almost 2 decades now, he's been having deep, thoughtful conversations with image makers from around the world, exploring not just how they make their pictures, but why they do it. He, like us, is fascinated in and by the why. He's worked in the photo industry for even longer, including time as a writer and editor. But what really sets him apart is the way that I think he brings this empathy and this patience and this real curiosity to the craft. He's also a fabulous street photographer. He's a teacher, but more than that, he's somebody who listens. So whether you've been following The Candid Frame for years and years and years and years, or whether you're new to his work, I hope you'll enjoy the conversation. I think you will. Because when Ibarionex speaks, he's not just talking about photography, he's talking about life. And I mean that. And that is particularly pertinent for the first part of our conversation, which covers the start of the year when he lost his home and his studio to the LA fires. My guest today is Ibarionex Perello. Let me ask how life's changed since the fire. I know you've answered so many questions about this, and it was such an important part of this year. And asking how life has changed since the fire, it sounds a bit like an asinine question, really, I know, but I'm not solely referring to
your precious family home or your podcast or your studio, the trinkets that are important to life that you would have lost in that fire. I'm curious about your outlook, actually. What's changed in you?
In many ways, it was a surprising blessing in a variety of different ways, which I know that when people hear that it's hard to believe, but it was. Yes, it was devastating to lose the house and all the contents and to be displaced in that way. But one of the things that really shaped my family's perspective was that we were staying at a local hotel that was pet friendly. So we were in a hotel that I think 80-90% of the occupancy were other people who had either lost their home or were displaced because of the fire. And everyone was just talking to each other. And we were just down the way from the convention center, which was the place where all the emergency services were located. And people who didn't have funds for a hotel or didn't have a relative they could stay were staying in a huge hall. So almost immediately, we started hearing other people's stories, and some people were in worse situations than us. You know, there were couples who were elderly, they were very sick, or were completely reliant on, say, Social Security for an income, didn't have renters or home insurance, didn't have family. So you're hearing all these stories of all variations on the theme of having lost everything, and then quickly realizing, oh, it could have been a lot worse. You know, there were people just not half a mile from us who lost their lives because they didn't know there was a fire going on. They just went to bed and then never woke up because we didn't get any sort of notification until the next morning. And by that time, it would have been too late. You hear all these stories about people whose situations are worse than us, even now. You know, people who are even more underinsured than we were, who cannot rebuild. They can't afford to, because just the cost of rebuilding has just nearly doubled since last year and the end of last year. And so as we're sort of navigating these waters, we always sort of have that perspective. It's like, oh, wow, you know, we have a chance to be able to rebuild and, you know, to reclaim part of our lives. And we're grateful for that, for having that kind of option, as opposed to just having, well, we got no choice but to sell away the land for whatever price someone is willing to offer us. And also, it's kind of solidified our relationship in a way. As you can imagine, things were very tense for the first week or so. And my sister-in-law was living with us at the time. So 3 of us were cramped into a really small hotel room. And my wife and I had an argument, and 2 of our friends came by and gave us a proper talking to. And it was a catalyst for us to look at our relationship, especially the lingering resentments that we'd held towards each other, which were always like, you know, lingering pockets of gasoline that easily get ignited by the stupidest of things. And then we kind of went, okay, if we're going to get through this, we can't afford to be holding on to that kind of stuff. So that allowed both of us to sort of put those things sort of aside and to sort of recommit to our partnership in terms of prioritizing all the choices that we need to make in order to be able to get through this together. Because if we're at odds with each other, then it's not going to be a good experience, even if we get to rebuild the house. I think one of the points I made to her is, look, I would rather be in a lesser house than we're in right now and be happy about the journey that we went than having this beautiful, gorgeous place and having been miserable for the 2 years it took to rebuild it. In a real sort of brief synopsis of that, that's how it allows me to sort of look at the positive, see it compared to other people who don't have as much choices as we have, and to see how much our relationship has improved as a result of us letting go of some of that lingering baggage after 30 plus years of marriage and go, okay, let's let that go and just look forward and try to be as good to each other as we can be considering the circumstances.
I now understand what you mean about a blessing of sorts. I remember when I heard about you, I knew the fires were... I was speaking at the time actually with I don't know if you've spoken with Ted Sockie, the LA photojournalist, but I was speaking with him at the time, and he was talking about how a certain soul of the city had returned over that period.
Yeah, in our neighborhood, the street that my house was on was at the mouth of a horseshoe, right? So it wasn't a through street. So everybody on there was already on a text chat, even before the fires. So since the fires, everyone's sort of communicated through the text chat, sharing information, checking in on each other. So that was really sort of a unifying thing. Because one of the things, people have difficulty approaching someone who's lost something in the fire because they really don't know what to say, right? But, when you're in the same boat with thousands of other people who already know, it's really easy just to talk about it, because it's not about lingering on what's happened. It's like, well, what are you doing, in terms of insurance, in terms of dealing with FEMA or the Army Corps of Engineers or whatever it is. And so having that sort of support that that there's someone you can reach out to who can give you some insight based on their experience, because everyone is at different levels. There's some people who have already started rebuilding. There are other people who are still struggling with insurance. And so we're all able to be of service to each other in one way or another, which is really, really helpful. 6 or 7 months in, there's, in general, the larger community in Los Angeles, I think, has sort of moved on. The support, it's still there. But there are a lot more distractions that exist, and then that's inevitable with any sort of natural disaster that happens. Yeah. There's a real coalescence of support immediately afterwards, but the thing is, recovering from this takes years to happen. And that's where I'm so glad that I'm not doing this in isolation, because I don't know if I could do it if that were the case.
Well, to say this has been a challenge is certainly a ridiculous understatement, but thank you for the update, and I'll pop a link to the show you did with a mutual friend of ours, actually, Jeffrey Sodoris, the first show you recorded when you returned to podcasting from a new location after the fires. So let's talk about podcasting, shall we? I think of you, and I want you to take this in the charity that it's meant, as the grand, perhaps grander statesman than any of us can be in podcasting, in terms of our niche of photography, because you've been doing it 19 years. I thought, was there actually podcasting 19 years ago? And how were we listening to it? But there clearly was. But it was a very different landscape, though, wasn't it? Wasn't that when it was so confusing that you had to work out how to get an RSS feed? And
right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I don't know exactly what year it started, but I knew that I started listening around 2005. And immediately gravitated to the photography podcast. And at the time, there was Chris Marquardt from Tips from the Top Floor. There was Martin Bailey for the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast.
Martin was doing it then. Oh.
Yeah, Martin had started, I think, somewhere to 6 months before I did, if not a year. There was Jeff Curto from the History of Photography podcast, where he was recording his lectures from his classes. So, and I think there was another Brit who was doing a photo podcast. John Arnold. Yeah, he was doing one at the time. So those are the 4 that I was aware of when I first started. And like you said, back then, you didn't have Apple Podcasts, you didn't have Spotify, you didn't have anything like that. No. And you had to get an RSS feed, and then you had to get an app that would take the RSS feed and convert it into audio. And at the time, there were a whole bunch of different apps that people were creating so that you could, listen to podcasts. And that's how I came into it. So yeah, it was as Wild West as anything could be. There wasn't a whole lot of information about how to do a podcast. So I was sort of putting things together sort of piecemeal, from how to record audio, how to edit audio, and I started using GarageBand and creating a website, understanding what a blog was. So all these things I had to sort of learn at sort of the same time. But I felt like, wow, this is a great format for photographers to talk about photography rather than gear. And none of the other shows that I mentioned really were dedicated to just conversations. And I was working at the time as an editor for a photo magazine. I was always interviewing photographers anyway. So I had that skill set. So I just said, I just need to learn how to do this. And then I can start asking people to interview them for the show. And it just kind of took off from there. It was slow going at first, but eventually kind of sort of picked up and built its own momentum to the point where it's still here.
What did the original guests, what did they make of podcasting? My podcast has been running 5 years. I'm nowhere near 19 years. However, I know that sometimes it's not a struggle. Struggle is the wrong word, but it's still sometimes there's not a complete understanding of podcasting. And what do I do? What are you going to ask me? How's it going to work? I'm not quite. How does this fit with me? I would imagine 19 years ago,
to speak to a photographer and explain about this podcasting thing or an RSS feed and recording an interview, it might have been an initial reticence there to be saying, Ibarionex, can't we just do it for print?
Not really. Because I think the way that most of the people kind of received it was they were just being interviewed yet again. Yeah. But instead of it being translated into a magazine article, I had a digital recorder, which is how I started initially, with just a digital recorder, and recorded the conversations and then kind of released it. But over time, more and more people have had an understanding of what podcasting is. So I think them not understanding it initially was not a hurdle at all. I think if anything, it was just getting the first initial photographers who I didn't know personally, and saying, hey, I want to interview you. Yeah. Sort of explain how I wanted to do it and why I wanted to do it. So I think there was a little explaining there, because I think that me approaching them was probably the first time they'd ever heard of podcasting. But even now, like you still get the questions of how we're going to do this.
Yeah. How does it work?
Are you going to send me a list of questions, so on and so forth? And it's like, there's still despite the fact that it's been around for as long as it has, you still have some explaining, especially now since so many podcasts are video. People are sort of expecting that we're going to be doing a video show. And it's like, no, I'm going to see you, but I'm just going to be taking the audio and putting it out there, which is a relief to many.
Well, I want to come to the video side of it in a minute, because I think you and I share some similar thoughts in that respect. I've had various conversations with broadcasters and podcasters about the word podcasting, and that in those early, very heady, exciting days, podcasting was that new kid on the block. It was this exciting word. I wonder now whether we suffer from the fact that podcasting actually has this feel of it's all a bit bedroom.
Yeah, I think it can. I mean, because now everybody has a podcast, so there's that thing, especially here in Los Angeles. If if someone's a comedian, it's like, okay, what's your podcast?
Yeah.
Like, when's your next set at the Improv or the Comedy Stores? Well, what's your podcast?
Yeah.
It's pretty ubiquitous in terms of the entertainment industry. And then there's the other people who are just sort of like slapdash. But I think that's the good thing about podcasting is you've got such an extreme range, right? And then regardless of what your genre is, that there is a sufficient niche that if you're really passionate about, the conversations and you're doing it for the right reasons, you can find an audience for it. People think about Joe Rogan and making multi-millions of dollars, like there are easier ways of making money than doing podcasting.
Have you ever heard Joe Rogan's very first podcast?
No.
You should go back. It's still there. You can find it. But I know exactly what you mean. I think there is that belief that you'll be tomorrow's Joe Rogan, and there are 700,000 podcasts out in that podcast sphere.
Well, I don't know. I haven't checked lately, but I remember researching this some years ago and saying, because all podcasts, unless the RSS feed dies, are there forever. And then the percentage of podcasts that continue to be produced after, I think, 20 episodes, there's a precipitous drop.
Yes.
People suddenly realize that, this is a lot of work. And there's another precipitous drop after about maybe 40 or 60. So if you're able to make it past like the 60 episode mark, you're up in that very high percentile of podcasts that sort of continue. And because I was really curious in terms of the photo podcasts that are still being produced. And I think Martin Bailey is the only one who's regularly producing content. Yeah, because even Chris Marquardt is sort of intermittent in terms of his releases. He sort of transitioned away from producing regular episodes. Yeah, I think that's it. So in terms of the people that I know, of the shows that I listened to back in the day when I first listened to podcasts, I can't imagine that many of them are still around.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about what's called pod fade, where people they work really hard to make something sound as good as the big radio networks or podcast networks, then find it very hard to continue, which I imagine is why we do have podcasts that sound like they were made underwater in the bath.
I think the reduced polish of podcasting is one of the things that appeals to people, because listening to terrestrial radio here in Los Angeles, it seems very canned. You got the guys with the radio voice, and you got interviews that, may run 5 to 10 minutes or something like that, where someone's promoting something. You're not going to hear an extended conversation between 2 or 3 people for an hour.
No.
It's pretty, just doesn't happen, right? Podcasting sort of allows for that. And for me, I always had a fondness for good interviews. I mean, my heroes started with Studs Terkel, who was a famous writer.
I know of him, yeah.
Radio personality from mid-20th century. And he wrote seminal books like Race and Working, which were largely interviews that he conducted with everyday Americans. And he was just marvelous in terms of how he would be able to have conversations with people who weren't used to being interviewed, but just elicit wonderful things from them. And of course, in terms of radio, there was Terry Gross and other people whose interview skills I always really, really appreciated and admired. And so the podcast really kind of allowed me to enter that world on my own terms, talking about a subject that I was really interested in, and to get better and better at being able to, have a conversation with practically anyone for an hour or so.
There's a real intimacy to your style, and I'm sure it's a style that's developed. You didn't hit the ground running with it immediately, I'm sure, but it has this beautiful late night feel, if you don't mind me using that analogy, which I absolutely adore. Listeners say you're deeply calming and conversational. Is there they do, that's what they say. Is there a technique that you use to put your guests at ease? I think there is an art to podcasting. We talk about the art of photography, but I do think there's an art to speech, to podcasting, to interviewing.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I think first and foremost is learning how to listen. That's the big thing. That's why I don't work from a list of questions. I tried that initially, and that didn't work because I started seeing that I was looking at my list of questions and not listening. And sometimes someone will say something, and that piques my interest to do a follow-up question. And nothing frustrates me more than hearing an interview with someone who I would love to have a conversation with. The interviewee says something interesting, and then the host just moves on to the next question. And I'm going, wait. Follow up on what they just said, because that's really sort of interesting. So I think that for me is the key, listening. And the other thing is being aware what my first question is going to be, because I will never lead a conversation with how did you start with photography, or what kind of camera that you use, because especially people who have been interviewed hundreds of thousands of times, they have their pat answers, and I don't want to hear a pat answer. I don't want to hear the same anecdote that I've heard them share in other conversations. So for me, it's like, what's my in? To both establish the fact that this isn't going to be sort of the standard of what they may have expected if they've been interviewed before, but also to help me sort of figure out an in that allows it to be more conversational than a back and forth of question and answer. Those are the two things that I think I try to practice as best I can.
It's the photo walk of a Friday. Me with your letters and some thoughts, us with our cameras. It's a very dingy light, and you might be thinking, where's Barney this week? He's at his girlfriend's. I meant to tell you earlier on. Because of something that you'll hear about on the Extra Mile, we lost a day this week. Do you mind if I remain a bit cryptic about that, though? Extra Milers, you will find out exactly what happened. So I find myself making a walk a little bit later in the day than I usually would. So it's a bit of a sort of blur light. But I'm doing my best with a few sketchbook photos. I can't promise I'm getting any magic today, that's for sure. But where was I? Oh, Ibarionex is back shortly. On the Wednesday coming, we record our 500th episode show, which I'm thoroughly looking forward to. I reckon there might be about 30 or so of us taking a photo walk. And, you can still surprise us by just turning up. All the details are on the website. Just look at the menu item that says 500. On that subject, the man with the best literary name has sent a letter in. Chris Articulate from Australia Land. Congratulations, says Chris, and happy upcoming 500th episode. Well, we're not quite there yet. We're recording it, and then it goes out in a month and a bit or so's time. You know me with maths. Please have a Garibaldi on your photo walk with Giles and the others. I would have given my 35mm prime lens for the chance to come and walk with you. Your episode with Giles Penfound talking through his photographs was the first I'd ever heard from you both together. And I've never forgotten some of the stories and the insights. I often wonder, by the way, Chris,
whether, hang on, there's a thought coming, this could be dangerous, sound the klaxons, whether I could have some kind of offshoot podcast with that pen-found chap. Bit like Breaking Bad leading to Better Call Saul. I hope not to send you scurrying behind the sofa, Neil, but please know that you and your guests have been a constant companion for many years now, so I do appreciate it. You've accompanied me through countless commutes, work crises, life stressors, literal pandemics. Chris, do not use the P word. And many happy times as well. I might have to go and hide behind this sofa of flattery if it goes on this way. Thank you to you and your family for all the time and effort that you've given us all. I've included a couple of things below that caught my eye recently that I thought you might like to share on the podcast, and a couple of photos. By the way, Chris, thank you for mentioning the family, because this podcasting thing, as you've already found out today in my conversation with Ibarionex, is sometimes all-consuming. And yes, it needs the blessing or understanding of a family, particularly when we take the show on the road to India, Scotland, Mongolia. I'll talk a bit about that later on. I wish you all the very best of health and light, says Chris. A few things I thought you'd like. Right, here's a slight list. As a Sony shooter, I never realised that you can make your own in-camera film simulations like you Fujifilm people do. We're not a breed, you know. Until I found this thoughtful website that showed me how to do it for Sonys. It's been a delight to play around with them, the kind of stimulus that you were discussing with Marissa Roth last week when it comes to refinding your mojo. I put a few simulations on my A6600. Is that the way you say it? I don't know the Sony numbers. A660, A66, it must be A6600. I don't know. And I found a whole new lease of life and inspiration for free. So thank you for that link. First up, I shall put that on the show page for all our Sony friends. Secondly, here's a very underrated new-ish YouTube channel. I'm emphasizing the ish. I thought this guy might be a good guest. To me, he gives the best and most direct advice about how to make better photos than anyone I've seen online in years. He's up there with Sean Tucker for videos on making photos that I've rewatched multiple times. Well, you know my admiration and respect for Sean. So that's praise indeed. But I did start watching them, Chris, and I will pop one on the show page in the video library section today. His name is Gil Kreslavsky, and actually he's not so new, because I saw a video from 3 years ago when he went to Varanasi, a place that we're going to next year with the show. So I did take a real interest in that one. But you're right, super calm delivery, not patronising, not full of let's delve in after 5 minutes of just waffle. He is super. And I'm looking forward to watching more of his films. I particularly like the title called, I tell you what, this is the one I'll share. Bored with your photos? That's a good sign. Because he says some interesting stuff in there. And then says Chris, a few photos of my own, which I will pop on the show page for you. These were made in the last few weeks around Blue Mountains, Australia, in a freezing cold, for Aussies, winter. They speak to me of family, of winter and the environment. No social links for me, just stick up the photos, Neil. Chris, I actually remember going to the Blue Mountains when I visited Australia land. And it was in the winter for you when we visited. And actually, it was proper chilly. I have to say, I went that day without proper warm clothing. And I felt it. And I remember finding the biggest spider, too, that I've ever seen in my life. So big, it had its own postcode. Ta-da! It was huge. It was, where was it? I think it was in the train station. It was in the corner. Somebody saw it and screamed. Not us, I might add. Although I would have done if I'd have been first in the queue. It was huge. Mahoosive it was. So, yeah, thanks for the links. Thanks for the pictures. And I am sorry you won't be with us for the big 500 recording, but I think being 10,500 miles away is a pretty good hall pass. It's the 500 recording next week. Then shortly after, not long to go now, we're off to Scotland. Yes. Well, there'll be another special recorded. This year in Scotland, we're really grasping hold of the idea of creative writing alongside our photography. Obviously, it's mainly photography we're doing. I'll tell you a bit more about that soon. But first up, I'm so pleased that we're supported this month again by arthelper.ai.
I mention them at the start, and if you're not absolutely sure of how they may fit into your photography, let my studio self explain.
If you've ever thought about selling your photography online but haven't a clue where to start, I think Art Helper could probably help you because it's made for people like us. Here's how it works. You upload a photo, magically and instantly, professional content is made for you, such as social media posts, email newsletters, even full Substack articles, all in your own voice. It can also generate hundreds of mock-ups for every image you upload, things like your work framed, so people get a real understanding of what your photograph could look like on their wall. It helps you connect with the right buyers and even suggests pricing based on your market. And unlike most AI tools, it has an art protection guarantee, which means something very important: your images are never used for AI training. Free to try, and Art Helper is giving our listeners a special deal. Go to arthelper.ai, use the code PHOTOWALK and get 30 days free of the pro version. I'll make sure to put a link on the show page, but also now there's a video that my friend Brandon at Art Helper made to help us understand and be able to see how the thing works. So if you go to the show page, you'll see Brandon explaining and showing exactly how this could work for you and I. It's a great way to start selling your art or growing the business you already have. And thank you, arthelper.ai, for your belief in this show.
It's the Photowalk Show. Send your stories, your thoughts, your adventures that you've been on, with pictures if you can, to stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. Thank you so much for what's in the mailbag. I feel sometimes that we should just have a mailbag show because we've got quite a lot to go through. Should we do that one day? Send me a yay or nay on that one, because that's an edition. We could, I don't know, squeeze another edition in to do that. Neil, you're already doing reflections now. Maybe don't give yourselves too much of an extra job list. It's a joy upon joy today to speak with Ibarionex Perello on the show, and I'll be talking to him in a little while about his photography too. But for part two, as we get a fly past, where is it? It's in the clouds. Oh no, there it is. For part two, a little more on sound and podcasting. You see, Ibarionex, this is what I have to put up with in my nature studio. Helicopters. But I did say there'd be an element of behind the scenes of a podcast today. Here's Ibarionex, part two.
I thought when you mentioned you don't use notes, I shifted rather uncomfortably in my chair, knowing that I do use questions and notes. It's a way that I grew up with radio interviewing. And I thought, I wonder what Ibarionex uses then. I sort of started imagining these mind maps, because I know that you research your guests exhaustively, don't you? You're somebody that reads, learns, watches whatever you need to about them before they ever get anywhere near your the other side of the microphone. Is that it then? There's no mind? Yeah. There's no mind maps. There's just an initial question and away we go.
Right, yeah, because I'll read whatever I can. If they have books, I'll try to pick up copies of the books, watch other interviews that they've done sort of in the past, and I'm just looking for what my end's going to be, which will help me formulate that first question. But I have all that other information that I've sort of garnered. So when they're talking and they refer to something, then I'll remember, oh, wait, I read this, or they mentioned this in another interview, but I'll find how I want to sort of approach it. But, there's some people who I know nothing really about because I've just seen their work. Their work piques something in me that makes me, I want to talk to them. But they haven't been really a personality where they've been interviewed before. Sometimes I'm the first interview some of these people have ever done.
Wow.
So I don't know much about the person other than maybe the bio on their website and the work that I've seen. But I see something in the work where I go, the person who created this work, I'm pretty damn sure will have some interesting things to say just because of the nature of the work. And I can't really pinpoint what it is. It's not necessarily subject matter. It's not necessarily a technical approach that they apply to the creation of the images. It's just that something where I look at it and go, man, this is not just good work, but there's something unique and special about it. And I'm really curious, how does someone come to make this kind of work?
And it's your job to seek it out.
And I think it's been really good because the spirit of the show has always been, I don't just want the usual suspects on the show, because that was one of the frustrations with the magazine. Usually it was the same people in the magazines all the time, you know. Not to take away anything from those big name photographers that were oftentimes in the pages of these magazines, but there was always interesting work that was being created by people who did not have a name or didn't have a following.
Or were really near the start of their career.
Yeah. And who I was really curious about, but it didn't fit into what the goals of the publication was. And the podcast allowed me to have complete control to talk to anybody I wanted to talk to.
We were talking right near the start about guests expecting to perhaps be in video. This audio-video thing in podcasting, there's a passive nature to radio and the voice and storytelling through audio that I love. Above the same thing, just picked up and repeated as talking heads on say, YouTube.
And I have a particular tick that isn't really conducive to video because I'm not working from a list of questions. I'm kind of formulating the question in my mind. And when I tend to do that, I tend to look over to my right. And I'll go like this, and I'll be like, and I'll use my hands, and I'm not looking directly at the camera.
Yeah.
I can imagine that that's really distracting. You know, that every time I do it, maybe I'm being too self-conscious about it, but I know that I do it because I can feel myself doing it, right? And I just kind of go process, and then I go back to just...
Yeah,
you know,
that's normal conversation. I think if somebody held your eyes, you met them in I don't know, in a supermarket or whatever, and they held your eyes locked onto your eyes for that entire conversation, you'd think they were a bit creepy, wouldn't you? I'm not sure I'd feel comfortable. I want them to look around, but I do understand what you're saying.
You know, but it may be something that if I end up doing it, I'll just have to get used to it because I'm not a great fan of my own voice when I first started hearing it, as most people aren't. Right. You know, when they hear themselves play back, they go, "That's the way I sound like." You know, but I quickly got over it, and you know, people like the sound of my voice, so it works.
Look, we've talked about video. Now let's address what isn't perhaps an elephant in the room anymore, but AI and how you think that will affect podcasting. The experience of being human is, I think, very important. And I've always maintained that tonality, intonation, the way that we speak, the ers and the ums even, they're all part of the human package. But AI is getting really quite clever, and it's the voice AI is now able to do that, to pick up our as we see them traits. And that worries me a bit. And I wonder what you think about AI in this space.
Well, I don't personally. You still are able to tell, and if I click on a YouTube video today, and I hear that AI kind of voice, I immediately click off because I don't want to, hear that content. But in terms of podcasting, I suspect it's going to find its way in there. In terms of the kind of podcast that I do, AI is not going to replace anything that I'm doing, just because by its very nature, it's about, the human connection between two people, flaws and all. There are other things that, I no doubt will change. I started following this YouTuber that is specifically into AI, and it had been about 6 or 7 months since I'd last looked into it. And I saw how the latest versions, especially the one released recently by Google, has both the video and the voice syncing almost flawlessly, with each other. Basically, you could take an image that you've created in AI or maybe even a photograph, and it will create video content with a synced voice with camera movement, right? So as if very cinematic with the camera moving in, moving out. It's not just this static thing. And I'm going, wow, I can see, I'm seeing it a lot in advertising. I'm seeing that happen a lot. And I think there was just a film that's on Netflix now in which portions of it, clips within the film were made with AI. I haven't seen the film. All I read in passing that it was a film that came out of Brazil. So I suspect that in terms of those industries, that shots where normally you would have people who do CGI and all those other things, they're going to be hurting because now it's just a prompt.
Yeah.
It's not going to have to be all these labor-intensive hours to create these sort of imageries for, a special effects film or whatever it is. But in terms of what we kind of do, I'm kind of hard-pressed trying to imagine how AI will change that. I can't imagine, at least at this point. I think right now it's like I see YouTube just being dominated by all that AI-created content. From the thumbnails, immediately I can tell this is a AI-created thumbnail. And then when I click the video, either the person or the voice, it's all fabricated. It can be both exciting, but it can also be terrifying. You have no doubt that people are going to be using it for less than ideal reasons, right? And it can fool a lot of people.
Very much. It already is. I feel at this stage we should be saying something, or I should be like watch this space. But I'd like to pull back from the spectre of an AI version of either of us, but by talking about the real world and the real guests that you've had across the years. I certainly didn't want to turn this Ibarionex into a who's your favourite guest moment, but I do want to learn a little about the people that you've spoken with, and if anybody has perhaps surprised you across that time. And I'd like to prompt you with one name. We're coming up to our 500th episode, but on your 500th that you reached quite some time ago, you chose to celebrate it by chatting with Joel Meyerowitz, one of the most generous, one of the most genuine photographers I've ever had the pleasure to speak with. He's a very special man.
Yeah, I mean, Joel is they broke the mold with him. I think I've had him on 3 times. Because I don't have to do much. He just opens up his mouth and gems just fall out of his mouth. He's so thoughtful and sincere, and he's a very genuine person. And that really comes across. But a lot of the people that I've had on the show have been people that I've admired for a long time, like Mary Ellen Mark, Dan Winters, Eli Reed. I mean, there are people who I've been following since I picked up a camera. And to have a chance to really sort of talk with them and have a conversation with them and have it be as if we're peers. I don't feel like we're peers, but it feels like it to me. So that's always really kind of amazing to me, that I can have a conversation and I can create a connection with someone who really I don't know personally in any way, but who I only know through their work. But that during that time that I'm interviewing, we get to connect. And I think that's always one of the more pleasing things, especially when they tell me at the end that they had great fun talking with me for the period of time. And I get that a lot, and it's lovely to hear that, because it tells me that I've done my job correctly in terms of they don't feel like this is a burdensome question and answer. And then I think, in terms of surprises, can't say that, but many of the interviews I get surprised, I get caught off guard. The only one that did that to me was Martin Bailey, who during one interview I had, came out that he had gotten diagnosed with brain cancer, he had just gotten diagnosed, I think, within the week of the conversation or something like that, which just shocked the hell out of me. And thankfully, he's fully recovered. But that was the only time where I was just gobsmacked in terms of what he was sharing with me and just being willing to be open to discuss that. But otherwise, it's always been really nice to see how open someone is willing to be about their lives and their work beyond just sort of hitting the key talking points. I'm really amazed by the generosity that most people have in terms of opening themselves up to basically a complete stranger.
We return together to listen to the close of my conversation with Ibarionex shortly, where we talk about photography a tad more. The why today, by the way, the end of it, I don't think it's dark, but it's an amusing angle to it, I think. Anyway, don't say too much. You're doing a spoiler, Neil, as you usually do. I'm going to gently float an idea before you. Stand by. We're all standing, Neil. Are you ready? Yes. Ever since we hosted as a podcast Encounters in London earlier this year, it's become very clear to me that the adventures we run, the workshops that we do, should really fulfill a very important thing. Yes, we have our big adventures to Scotland, India and Mongolia, and I'll say a few words about those in a moment. But whether it's those, the big adventures, or the idea I'm about to float, I am keen that they should all have a real purpose about them. We talk a lot about workshops and what workshops are. So with all our adventures to come, I'll be making sure that there's even more of an emphasis on those facets. And that when you come away having achieved something for you, but also you felt part of the people around you. Very much an experience in every single way, where we can sit down and talk about photographs, learn or experiment with a few new skills, like creative writing. I know that's not everybody's bag, but actually we put all these things together, sound and writing and photography and community, and it becomes something, I think, really very special on these adventures that we take. So I'm thinking about doing some shorter events. When I say thinking, one's pretty much in the bag. 2 to 3 days. The first of which is a bit more rustic. Quick, dance around in the leaves. There we go, that's rustic. I'm going to be taking you camping, or if you have a camper vanning. Is that what they call it? To a very English experience, actually. A steam rally. I can't promise you Morris dancers, but I can possibly promise you a Wild West show and a medieval, what would you call them? What's the collective noun for medieval folk? I don't know. Talk amongst yourselves, have an idea. But whereas part of a team at this very English experience will be photographing people, having some photographic presentations, working to produce a zine together that tells the story of something uniquely, in this case, English. I wanted to call it Beyond the Beer Tent, but I suggested this the other day to Sam, and she looked at me in that kind of, I don't think that's a great title way. So put some dates in your diary, and I will tell you more about it soon. Those dates are the 19th, the 20th, and 21st of June. Go on. Yeah, there. That diary. That's the one. Open it up. 19, 20, 21st. You're washing your hair on the 21st. We'll just scribble that bit out. It'll be in the south of England. I will tell you more later on. Right, talking of trips, before we return to Ibarionex for the final time today, the 3 big adventures we have at the moment. Take it away, Studio Neil. Tell us about them.
We have 3 wonderful ways to travel with this show. 3 unique, worldly, precious experiences. This September, we travel together for a retreat to Scotland. Escape with us to Scotland's Black Isle. 5 days of mindful photo walking, forest writing, darkroom printing, sound storytelling on a working soft fruit farm. It's more than photography, it's a retreat for your senses, where creative community meets nature's rhythms and time slows down, I like to think, alongside like-minded souls. We have our daily challenges, yes, and each evening we eat together with wonderfully home-prepared food as we look back at the day experienced. Next year, in March 2026, we return to India. Over 9 immersive days in March 2026, this isn't just a photography trip, it's a creative awakening. In Kolkata, we'll drift through steaming street markets as they awaken, ride the famous yellow taxis of the city and pause for chai with families. We go to the largest flower market and photograph a wrestling story. And then in Varanasi, we capture shimmering Ganges dawn rituals, saffron-robed pilgrims, and the centuries-old pulse of Ghats and temple life. Small groups, local guides, afternoon edit sessions, journaling guidance for platforms such as Substack. It is a journey that goes way beyond the lens to awaken sensitivity, story, and definitely spirit. And then in September 2026, from the moment we land in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia begins to whisper its secrets. What a place! But it's in the wide-open Altai where its soul reveals itself. We will trace ancient trade routes and Buddhist monasteries to the golden silence of the steppe. We'll explore temple ruins scented with time and stand shoulder to shoulder with eagle hunters, watching their golden birds return to outstretched arms, photographing and documenting their life. We'll witness the riot of colour and tradition of the Eagle Festival. We'll work with farmers, live alongside them, creating photo stories of the like you won't have done before, I'm sure. And we photograph the streets of the city, too. It's raw, it's real, and it's a visual journey deep into Mongolia's timeless rhythm. The world doesn't wait. The stories, the faces, the fading light, they're all out there, waiting to be noticed by you and I. Traveling like this isn't about ticking boxes. From day one, we've always wanted to work differently on this show. We'd like you to feel something about you shift. You go to make pictures, yes, but what you bring back shapes how you see everything else from that moment on. Some journeys just don't end when you get home. Go to photowalk.show and all the links for these incredible 3 journeys are there. Scotland only has one place on the first week left, mind.
I am so excited about all of our adventures to come. I really am. It's such an important part of the community, and it's something that I really want to build with my very good friend and my colleague Lynn Fraser. We're building these adventures together as the journey beyond, which is part of the Photowalk, and I am so looking forward to journeying beyond, adventuring beyond with you. I really am. So, shall we rejoin Ibarionex Perello? This time, let's talk picture making.
I want to move on to photography. I thought it was really interesting because it's something I felt for a long time when I first became a photographer. So you've been a podcaster for 19 years. All that time, of course, you've still been in photography as a photographer, and you've been in the photography business and for much longer than 19 years, of course. But I was intrigued by this thing that you said to Jeffrey Sidoris. You said it's really only in the last 10 years that you've come to some sort of agreement with yourself that you feel absolutely comfortable in referring to yourself as a photographer or the medium of photography.
Yeah, and I think that just comes from the burden of comparison, that I was comparing what my career looked like compared to all these other people. And then because I wasn't matching up with that, I felt like I couldn't claim that I was a photographer. I didn't have a studio. I didn't have a long track record of all this editorial and commercial work that I had created. I was just largely making pictures for myself and then using them in the magazine articles that I would write about photography or and along those lines, or the books that I would write. And because I wasn't fitting the model of a lot of the photographers that I followed, I felt like, like you, like I was just visiting. And then at some point I had to just kind of recognize that, I'm just as much of a photographer as they are, even though the way that the images are used and how I'm compensated for it are markedly different. It kind of helped that I was doing the podcast because there I did not feel that. Because when I started, there was nobody to really compare myself with.
No.
Which gave me complete license to do it whatever way I well pleased. So now I think that kind of helped me because I realized the only reason I didn't feel that about podcasting is because I wasn't comparing myself to anybody else because there was nobody to compare myself with. But with photography, I had countless, 100 plus years of people to compare myself with. And then I just had this eventually, I haven't completely let it go, but I still hold on to some of it. But I think for the most part, I'm comfortable with how and why I make most of my photographs.
Do you think one of the problems is that photography has a hierarchy as such? I can say this because I'm a wedding photographer, and I might say it slightly tongue-in-cheek as well. But we sit right at the bottom. Then above us come people with, strange niches like Snell's at Dawn Pictures. Then you get portrait photographers. Then you've got news and journalists. And then right at the top of this hierarchical thing is true high fashion photographers who believe they're up there. So slightly tongue-in-cheek I'm saying this in, but
right.
I definitely think that there's a hierarchy in photography that might lead to what you were describing and how you felt.
Yeah. I think that a lot of that is about prestige, marketing, classism. A lot of that stuff is thrown into how certain photographers are put at a higher pedestal than others. That's something you either buy into or you choose not to buy into. Mm. It's easy when you're aspiring to become a quote-unquote professional photographer that you start modeling yourself over people that have been considered successful, whether it's fashion or portrait photographer, wedding photographer, so on and so forth. As I've sort of expanded the world of photography for the purposes of the show, I've gotten to meet countless people who are producing exceptional work that do not have the fame or the accolades of some of the other people that I have a chance to talk to, who are creating exceptional work. I look at the work and I'm just like, what the hell is this? How did someone come to make this? And They're just propelled by the desire to make something with the camera that expresses something about the way they see and they experience the world. And it's amazing stuff. And the fact that they are not gaining, 6-7 figure income or getting asked to speak and doing parody photo or whatever, isn't lost on me. I've gotten to speak, at different events and things like that. But even then, there's been the feeling of being that imposter syndrome that goes on. Because I've been at places where people who I really admire, who have incredible bodies of work, and I'm up there hanging out with them and going, what door did I sneak through to be here? Right? But the reality is like if you let go of that poison of comparison, there's a lot of freedom to be had there. And I just try to remember that I'm making these pictures because I really enjoy making photographs, that I can't imagine not making photographs. I don't like having to modify or change how I'm doing it to accommodate what this other person thinks I should be doing or how I should be doing it. I want to feel like if I want to photograph someone, it's because I want to photograph them. I don't want to have to deal with, taking 100 pictures of them and them telling me, I like this one, don't like this one. It's just like, if I were a miser, I'll make your picture, I choose it, I retouch it the way I want to, and I'll send it to you, and you're going to be happy.
In this desire to work on the projects then that you want to shoot and how, I know one of your more challenging personal candid projects were pictures of your mother-in-law, candid documentary moments, which not everybody feels comfortable making, these intimate family stories.
She was living with us in the last 3 years of her life. Obvious that she couldn't live on her own anymore, so we brought her into our house and started taking care of her. And I was coming up. My garage at the time got converted into a studio and an office in the house that burned down. And I was coming up the stairs and walking into the kitchen, and my wife was doing my mother-in-law's hair in the kitchen. And I looked at that, and I grabbed my camera and I made a photograph because it was a really beautiful, tender moment.
Connection.
And there was a relationship between my wife, my sister-in-law, and their mother that was happening as a result of her living with us now. And so for that 3-year period, I was periodically making images that were reflective of that. Not because I intended to use those images for a book or anything like that, but I knew it was important that eventually when Faithy passed, that they see the kind of love that existed between all of us during that time. That was the reasons I was making those images. I knew they couldn't see it in the moment because there's so much stressors when you're dealing with an elderly parent with a variety of different health issues and all the different crises that happen. It's hard to have perspective on it. But I have 3 years worth of images of her life with us, which I have to sit down and sort of edit through because I probably will make a book just for family. But after my mother-in-law did pass away, my wife made the point of saying that she was really glad that I had made those pictures. There's a woman, Safi Sabayak, who I've had on the show, and I kind of took direct inspiration from her because she had photographed her father, who was suffering from a variety of different illnesses. I think one of them was MS. And that project was a collaboration between her and her father. And those images are incredibly intimate, vulnerable, and just beautiful. I recognize the importance of making those really personal images. And I think of any of the photographs I've ever made, probably those are probably going to be the most important in terms of a body of work. It's led me to teach a workshop that started during COVID where I have people use their own lives as the sounding board for creating a body of work. And I did this in direct response to COVID because everybody was locked in. But the work that's come out of that workshop has been amazing, absolutely amazing. I mean, it's really a transformative experience, both for the photographers to take it and for me, because I'm really more of a facilitator. And what happens eventually is that early on, there's going to be one photographer in the group that makes a picture that is really raw, very vulnerable. And it serves as a catalyst for everyone else in the group to be willing to go there as well. And the work that you see subsequently is just amazing. And these are people who are not seasoned documentary photojournalists, but they're using their lives. And the whole idea is like wherever you are in your life right now, whatever you're dealing with right now, that's the launching pad. Whether you are a recently empty nester, beginning a new relationship after a long divorce, dealing with some sort of health issue, whatever point you are in your life, you're always dealing with something. And why don't you just start there, making pictures about what your life looks like and feels like right now, so that when you look at those pictures years from now, you go, that's what it felt like to be in there.
Well, that's nostalgia, isn't it? A very important element of photography. Are you nostalgic about your life's work so far and how you've changed or improved with your photography?
Oh yeah, I use Lightroom, so I've organized all my digital images, and I think I have like 20 years or something of digital files, and I removed all the flags, all the ratings from all of the images, and I started going back each year and just going, okay, I need to, because my rating system was all over the place because it's changed over the years. I said, if I'm going to start organizing this stuff to get a sense of what I've been doing, I need to do that. And there are images that I made over 20 years ago that I see and I go, my God, this is a great photograph. Why did I pass over this one? Obviously, there was something happening in the moment that I made it that I wasn't really conscious of until later. And it's always really interesting to me that I made a really great photograph, but didn't recognize it as such in the moment, even when I took it or even when I looked at it on the screen, because I hadn't really developed an understanding of what I had done until years and years later. So I think it's always kind of fascinating. That really amazes me about the whole process of being creative, that sometimes you're not hyper aware of everything that you're doing, yet somehow your subconscious is there still at work. And if you don't get in the way, you can make a really good photograph. I think for me, one of the challenges is straddling that idea of complete control and complete surrender, that there's this little gray overlap between the two where there's a spark of something really interesting happening. And I usually do, when I'm teaching a workshop, there's a couple of exercises that I have people do that I do myself periodically in order to get into that space. And one of them is you do 36 exposures, 24, 36 exposures, but you can't chimp and you can't delete. You just shoot. You just jet the camera in front of you. You don't even look through the viewfinder or frame it in the LCD, right? You just use a fixed focal length like 30 or 50 or 35 or 50 or 28, and you just kind of eyeball it with your naked eye and you just make the pictures. And it's remarkable what comes out of that, because sometimes, inevitably, everyone makes at least one picture that really is really good. Even though it isn't technically perfect, the camera's off kilter or whatever it is. But it's learning how to sort of trust something in your gut that tells you, oh, yeah. Because I think there's a tendency to feel like you have to control anything and everything. And sometimes that can be adverse to really letting your full creativity come. I think there's a certain level of competency you have to have with the camera, but then there's another part that you have to sort of completely let go. Sam Abel, who is a longtime friend who I've had on the show a couple of times.
Yes, I've heard you.
He shoots a program. And that kind of blew my mind when I took the workshop with him. And I was like, what? But it was really fascinating because he's so much into sort of the composition and being really patient and letting things sort of play out. And really, composition is at the heart of everything that he does. But it was really interesting because after I took the workshop, for a couple of months, I forced myself to put it in a program. And there was a level of discomfort that I had in living in a program because I could see that the aperture that the camera was choosing for me would not be the aperture I would normally choose to shoot with. But I'd have to sort of let it go. It was interesting because the discomfort I felt like that's a good place to be. Because whenever I'm stuck, it's usually because I've gotten into a rut where I'm producing the same kind of picture over and over and over again. So I know that at that point I have to do something different in order to be uncomfortable so that I can break through. And sometimes that's meant going program. Sometimes that's meant shooting with a 24 millimeter as opposed to using a 35. Whatever, wrench I can throw into the works that forces me to have to approach a scene or a subject in a different way. Because then I basically have to start over to figure things out, how to make them work. And that's when the work gets interesting. Yeah, you fail more than you succeed, but eventually that stuff will click. Like learning how to use, because I use 35 millimeter forever. I know how the scene looks with a 35 millimeter.
I heard you talking to Valerie Jardin about that one single focal point
or focus, not focal point, focus.
But you use a 24, you can't shoot with 24 like you do with a 35.
Yeah.
And learning how I need to work it is still a challenge. I know what I need to do. And especially when it comes to street work, that means a real close proximity to my subject. Kind of uncomfortable. But when I go there, I know exactly what I need to do. And for me, it's like getting past the discomfort of getting within 2 feet of my subject. Not Bruce Gilden style, but in the way that I shoot, because I tend to build the scene and allow people to come to me, as opposed to me running up to someone and shooting. I'm not that kind of shooter. But if I build a composition and I know I need somebody close, I can arrange it so that they'll pass near me in order to sort of complete the composition. But there are other times where it's just more expansive scene, where I'm including a lot more in the frame and making that work as well, where I've got all these lines and all these shapes in there. And what I've told people is that what I've been working on is seeing how much more I can include in the frame, just short of it falling apart. And that's the challenge for me. Because I went from going all the way down to the point of abstraction by eliminating things in order to build compositions. And I can do that really well. But then it was like, okay, I am repeating myself by doing this over and over and over again. Now I need to start doing the opposite, putting more into the frame. And Joel Meyerowitz speaks of that during this period late in his street photography work, where he started to do that himself, right? Where he was using the wider angle lenses and he was being much more inclusive of what included in the frame, and still, it's like a juggler. Yeah. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do as a photographer for the most part when I'm out there. Using a 35 or even a wider focal length, it's frustrating because there's so many more failure points. But when it works, it's incredibly gratifying.
I do like the idea of the exercise you give your students in your workshops in that respect. I know you don't like questions that don't necessarily latch onto the last one, but I'm gonna employ one.
Okay.
At the end of our shows, I ask a question which I know you'll eat for brunch. It's coming up for brunch for you this time of day when we're talking, because it's something that you talk so often about, probably in your workshops as well, which is more about the why than the how of photography. And so usually my last question to a guest is why? Why do you do this? Or it can be all manner of things, or why, can't it? I wonder whether that why has changed post-fire to pre-fire in many respects, as we learned about right at the start of our conversation. What would Ibarionex, what would your why be?
I think it's too soon to understand whether the impact of the fire has changed my why. I think it's too fresh yet to sort of figure it out, because my time to dedicate to photography has been markedly reduced since the fire, because there's so much other stuff to do. I was photographing a lot in the gardens where I work at the Huntington. So I have this, immediately after lunch at noon, I kind of do this circuit around the campus and do this sort of 20-minute walk and making pictures unlike what I usually have made, which is largely of plants in the desert garden or the Australian garden or the Japanese garden, the variety of different areas that we have on the campus, trying to find something interesting to sort of photograph. And there, the why was just driven by I needed to be creative in some way. I needed to do it. I could not keep going, not making photographs, because it would be like me going hungry. You don't want to be around me if I'm hungry and I haven't made pictures in weeks. My wife will testify to that. But I think the why, for me, it's always been a process of self-affirmation.
Right.
The way that I see the world, the way I interpret it, and what I create from it is valuable for me and for other people as well. So it's always been one of the things that I know that I can do well that make me feel good about myself. Because I'm awash with insecurities as anyone is. But when it comes to me wielding a camera, I have no doubt that I could pull something out from nothing and make something of substance and that's beautiful. Whether it's lasting or not is not for me to decide. But in the moment, I look at it and I go, ooh. Because for me, the best part of making a photograph is not releasing the shutter or even making the print. It's that moment where I go, ooh, and I see something and I see the potential of it. that moment of recognition is what I'm always in pursuit of, because it is a full body experience when I see something like that. And I go, ah, and I in those moments I feel very much alive, because I'm completely focused and I'm not burdened by the past or the future. It's like I'm immediately present in that moment, and that feeling is what I miss when I'm not photographing for a long time. You know, having a physical photograph that is reflective of that is kind of like gravy. The main course is that moment of discovery, and then the challenge of, can I translate that into a photograph? So I think that's the reason I make it, is because I'm in pursuit of that feeling, because I don't get that feeling from anything else in my life. The podcast, in terms of things that I do professionally, I think the podcast is second, you know, in terms of that. And then writing is probably a third, you know, when I'm writing something and I've finished it and it's there. But I think photography is the thing that gets me more present and free of any issues of insecurity, judgment, comparison. Because in that moment, I know I'm the only one who's seeing this. I'm the only one discovering this. No one else, even if there are thousands of people around me and dozens of them wielding cameras themselves, they're not seeing this. They're not experiencing this. And I see it. And that feeling, man, there's nothing like it. And I remember that from the very first moments I started wielding a camera. That feeling. And that's what ultimately sort of drives me to always want to make pictures. I jokingly say when I'm dead, just put when you put me in the box, put a camera in there and a microphone just in case.
And my thanks to Ibarionex. It has been a real privilege to have time to speak with you, Ibarionex. It really has. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I certainly hope it won't be the last on this show. There seems to be a lot more to talk about. And actually, Ibarionex returns on the Extra Mile today for 3 more stops. 3 photographic and life questions. The Extra Mile is our Patreon channel, where you can help support the show. Ibarionex is here, and the new Reflections feature has, it has a sort of podcast story, really, of what unfortunately happened on Wednesday, in the early hours of Wednesday this week. Wednesdays are really very tricky, you know.
On this week's Extra Mile,
Sebastião Salgado, he was a photographer who was just amazing. He didn't start off as a photographer. He was an economist, and his work came out directly as a result of the disparities he saw in his native Brazil that kind of extended to the world. And his images are just absolutely amazing, both from an artistic fine art perspective, but also in terms of documentary and photojournalism.
If you'd like to hear a little more from the Photowalk each week, head to the website and click Extra Mile or the orange Support the Show button, and you'll be able to read all about it, as they say, and help us keep walking week after week. Without our Patreons, honestly, this show would not exist. It really would not. So I am genuinely thankful for your support and your belief. The PS to the show is to come, but first we need a play-out song, a record to make a few final frames to, or think about what's been said today. And I have some news about the play-out song, actually, in a moment. I'm choosing something smooth to go with my guest, Ibarionex Perello, today. Ziv Moran is the artist, is my choice, and High Time is the song. And I'm back with a PS for the show in a moment.
I call to the mountain, sitting across the bay. Morning comes always steadier than yesterday. I'll take the stillness as a sign to write a song about things we've done and the things still to come. Flowers in the plenty, coloring in the view. Red sunburns late Sunday afternoon. Talking for hours about the places we have gone and things we've done and the things still to come. trees with orange leaves, they take me to a place. I'd be by your side, I would run all night and day. Tall pines and fall lines, I'm glad that we are home. And time with you, I would never outgrow. 'Cause it's high tide, high tide, high tide, high tide.
That's Ziv Moran's High Time, super song. Very, very smooth. Right, let me tell you a little bit about the music on the show as I make a final sketchbook picture. It's a bit really, because we've not got the greatest light. Let me find myself a little bit of light just further up the path here. There we go. Ooh. Don't worry, nobody saw, Neil. Yeah, it's just the path winds away. It really is a sketchbook image. It's now more. Right, the music on the show. Hold on. 1 2 5th, F3.2. Oh, let's go F4. And 1000 ISO. Cool, that light really is dropping. And there we go. A sketchbook picture. Yes, the music. I'm going to switch things around a little. It's not always as easy as I'd like, such as the, well, I mentioned this before, the rather archaic way that music licensing works for podcasting. It's not always easy to find a song that perfectly matches the feeling of our shows, even though I think Artlist is just a fantastic place to source music for your podcasts and YouTube and so on. We do have a link, by the way, not that they sponsor us. So I'm going to rest the Playout song for a little while. And instead, I'm going to bring in a few more musical bridges within our show that flow out of the pieces as we walk. I know we do that at the moment, but you'll notice a slight difference when I do them. Shorter, obviously, than the Playout tracks, but music that we've used in the past and music that we'll use that's new for the future too. So we'll still retain that very important. It's always been a big part of this show, the musical element, but that alongside the letters and the competitions, etc., gives this show such a unique feel. But we'll instead have our wonderful end themes to go with the Y, and then that nice jazzy, bluesy song at the end that plays out of the final thoughts and the PS. Talking of which, that is to come in a moment. So that's it for today. My sincere thanks to you. If you are or you're about to become an extra miler, we will keep building this community of kindness in the photographic and walking world together. Some mentions for those who smooth the voyage. My thanks to Neil Ford. There's a reason for me smiling. He plays a big role in today's Extra Mile. Something happened. Yes, Neil, you keep telling us it was something on Wednesday morning, early doors, wasn't it? Yes. And if it weren't for Head of IT, Neil Ford, I shudder to think what might have happened. My thanks also to Andrea Gilpin, who keeps a watchful eye over Instagram, as does Kelly Mitchell for Facebook. Write a postscript for the show. Today is from Rumi. Now, I felt I needed something that complemented the conversation about communication today. Rumi was a 13th century Persian poet and Sufi mystic, best known for his deeply spiritual and often lyrical poetry, which explores themes of love, divine connection, grief and longing, and the search for meaning. That perfectly describes Landlord David, the prancing haddock. Despite being over 800 years old, again perfectly describing David the Prancing Haddock, Rumi's writing still resonates today and is widely quoted, especially in the context of mindfulness and creativity and emotional wisdom. It's a short quote, I have to say, so don't blink for the next few seconds. But remembering what Ibarionex said about the skill of communication, that being what you hear over what you say, I thought this from Rumi was absolutely perfect. To speak is to sow. To listen is to harvest.
What's there to hold in the light of this moon? My mind keeps searching, but my heart decides. Thoughts can be cruel, they're not mine to hold. The space unravels when you let go.
The Photowalk is a Loading Zone production.